Nerd alert!
Ciao e benvenuti su Old Fart Nerd, io sono Rob e penso che questo sia il momento, l'evento più importante e più interessante e più bello per il mio piccolo canale YouTube. Scusate l'emozione, ho la voce un po' rotta perché per me è davvero tanto, perché sto per intervistare uno dei più importanti autori del fumetto americano, dei comics, e sto parlando, signore e signori, del mitico e leggendario Mr. Steve Englehart.
Buongiorno.
Hi Steve, thank you very very much to be here with us.
Happy to be here.
How are you? Tell us.
I'm good. I'm good.
Let me introduce to you, to our friends, my daughter Lucia. Lucia, ci aiuterà nel capirci con Steve, perché il mio inglese purtroppo è quello che è. Okay, Steve, if you agree, I can start with the interview. I have prepared many, maybe too many questions for you, and some of these questions have been written by friends or followers of my little YouTube channel, or friends from the Telegram group where I'm in, and they all love to hear you because they love you, love your characters and your stories, as me, of course. I'm going to start from the beginning. So I have the questions so I can avoid to sell to tell bad things in English. I'm not too okay. And so I start with this question. You were born in Indianapolis some years ago. Okay, we say years. You earned a degree in psychology in 1969, and then served in the army. How did you go from academic and military life into the world of comics?
Well, I was a comics fan while I was still in college and while I was in the military. And one afternoon, on a Friday afternoon, I had no duties in the military, and for whatever reason, which I've still amazed at myself now, decided to go to New York and ask Neil Adams if I could work with him when I got out of the Army. Neil was my favorite comic book artist. I thought it was, I thought his stuff was the high point of comic book art. And so I said, I went to New York, I met with him. I said, when I get out of the Army, are you looking for an assistant? And he said, well, why don't you start now? And I said, well, because I'm in the Army. And he said, well, can you come up every weekend? And I said, yeah, I probably can. And so that's what we did for 6 months. I came up every weekend and worked with him on a story that he was doing. He was doing a lot. He was doing Batman, Green Lantern, but he was doing a story for the Vampirella magazine, which he sort of reserved for us to work on. And that's what we did on the weekends. And so when I got out of the Army, I had contacts, I had a published piece of work, etc. And so I just went to New York. In those days, you physically had to go to New York because there was no internet, there was no FedEx, there was
Yeah.
nothing. You had to be able to hand things to people. And so I went to New York and, you know,
And
gave it a shot.
you joined the Krusty Bankers too in that period.
Well, that was before the Krusty Bunkers.
Ah,
I was his first assistant, and then when I left him to go out on my own, then probably within a year, he started getting other assistants, and that became the Krusty Bunkers. So I was kind of the original in a sense, but there was only me. There wasn't a group of people at that time.
uh-huh, uh-huh. And in fact, my second question was about the things you have told. I mean, you after this experience, you came to Marvel as a fill-in for Gary Friedrich,
Right.
and then Roy Thomas gave you few stories with the Beast in Amazing Adventures in 1972. And then you start to write the defenders with Sal Buscema and so on. Or for today's aspiring writers, that sounds like a fairy tale. You were very young and you achieved your dream in just a few years. You were very young. I mean, very little time passed from when you decided to write comics to when you arrived to Marvel. So, how was that even possible? Was it because, I don't know, editorial offices were more informal, more like a big family, a workshop? Was it as easier to get in touch with people at that time that today that are big corporations?
Well, yes, to all of that. Um, Marvel, told the world that they were a bullpen of happy people doing comics, and that's really what they were. That wasn't hype. It was probably a little bit of hype, but I mean, it was a small group of people. Marvel was not a large organization at that point. But it was people who really liked to do comics, and the comics were doing well. I mean, so they were getting a lot of positive feedback. Um, but there was, as you say, I ended up with an office job because Gary Friedrich asked me to fill in for him, and then Gary didn't want to write a story, so they kind of looked around the office and they said, you want to write this?" And I said, "Sure," because like I wasn't planning to be a writer, but I thought, sure, I imagine I could do that. I liked what I wrote, they liked what I wrote, so then they said, "Well, you wanna do more?" And it was really, um, the informal situation. I mean, it's impossible to really compare today, but, I mean, within a couple months of my getting started writing The Beast, Roy came and said, "Here, you wanna write Captain America?" It's like today, if you wanted to write Captain America, there'd be 8, 7 levels of editors and marketing people and all this kind of stuff, the whole Disney structure. But in those days, it was just, it was comics. Comics was in America, people either liked comics or they knew absolutely that comics were crap. That,
Mm,
that
mm.
it's like that you couldn't convince them. You couldn't say, "Look at this, check this, read this story. You'll like this story," because they just knew that there was no redeeming value in comics. That, of course, has changed now too. But it was their a bubble in a sense. It was a bubble with a million and a half people in it. But if you liked comics, there was no real barrier. Roy, the editor, had been a fan person doing fanzines and so forth. Um, it was just if you liked comics and when he gave me the Captain America, he said, "There's 2 things. We're gotten so big now that I don't have time to edit everything,
Mhm.
so it's up to you to do it right. If you can make this book sell and you can turn it in on time every month, That's it. That's all.
Okay.
That's all I need from you, you know? And so then you were able to do anything you wanted if you met those 2 criteria. And that's why, you know, when I would do stuff like later, you may touch on this later, but when I did Captain America and it turned out that the president of the United States was the bad guy
Yeah.
in a sense, um, nobody there was no editorial pushback on that. It was entirely up to me as to what to do with these characters. And so it was a dream come true. I mean, it's like that situation was unique. The fact that I was young, I was getting my chance to write comics that I really, you know, grew up wanting to write, and I could do anything, right? I just there were no limits, and so, um, I took advantage of that, but that was a, you know, very much the right place at the right time
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? I mean, because it didn't happen after that. It was just right there. And those books, here we are 50 years later, those books have stood the test of time
Uh,
because it was not just me, but I mean, everybody else it was just raw creativity that we really wanted to put our best efforts into these comics. And so we came up with stuff that did stand the test of time. Yeah.
and Captain America and also the Avengers are uh, maybe Avengers is the long run you realized for Marvel from 1972 to 1976 when you left Marvel. Uh, it was one of your first projects, your first run in Marvel, but even if you were so young, you changed the team's lineup. You took out Hawkeye. You brought in the swordsman. You created the Kotati. You created Mantis, a female character from Vietnam. You explored the love stories between Vision and Scarlet Witch, between Mantis and Swordsman, and you wrote the Celestial Madonna saga. So many things, a story, a really fast-paced story with the alternate dimensions, tones of heroes and villains, revelation about the original Human Torch and his connection to the Vision, death, resurrections. What inspired you to write such a bold and conceptually rich saga? And it was one of your first big work in Marvel. So your fantasy was exploding to write all these things all together.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I loved comics. I got my chance to do comics. I could do anything I wanted to do in comics. Therefore, I wanted to do everything that I could do in comics. Um, and, I mean, obviously I had the ability to do that, not just conceive of it, but, I just was having a great time. I just was having fun writing this stuff and seeing what I could do with the Marvel Universe, you know? I mean, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, those guys that all created it. Um, it was only 10 years later when I came in, right? So it was still the original characters. I was writing the Thor, the Captain America, not, you know, 50 years later when there's been 17 of everybody, right? Um, so and I felt an obligation to treat these characters with respect, right? I mean, it's like I wasn't there to like blow things up and do my own thing. I mean, I wanted to take what I had been given and honor it. Um, I've always thought that. I mean, the guys who came before me, they did what they did, and it was in a different era for them, and they had their limitations, and they did. But in my time, I wanted to always be respectful of what had come before, and at the same time, move it forward, take it someplace that it hadn't been, um, and explore things that hadn't been explored. And so, everything that you just mentioned about the Avengers, that was all just me. Here's the thing, I can do this for a while, or I can do this, or I can see where this goes. I like complicated stories. I like things that hang together, I mean, that's just me doing that. Um, and again,
I think that the environment in the bullpen was very
favorable.
fair to do these things. I think there are
Because again, it wasn't just me. There was Steve Gerber, there was Don McGregor, there was, the Jim Starlin, there were, all these guys who would all sort of come in at the same time. We had all grown up on comics, and we all sort of, for whatever reason, we all sort of at that point in time thought we would like to get involved. So there was in Marvel was already this bullpen of people who like to do comics, and there was this new wave of younger people coming in. When Roy gave me Captain America, that book was failing. It was, with Captain America, I'm sure you heard that story. That book was not doing well. The fact that I turned it around sort of cemented the fact that I might actually have a career in this thing. But and the Defenders, I loved the Defenders. They were fun. They were, I liked all his characters. But when Roy decided to give up the Avengers and he gave it to me out of all the people he could have given it to, that's when I kind of knew that, they trusted me. They liked what I was doing and so forth. And that was, that's when I figured I'm actually doing this.
and I think also that maybe Roy Thomas let you more free than Stan Lee.
Yes, yes.
Stan Lee was more um, had a big or
Well, yeah, because Roy tells me, I didn't know this at the time, but Roy said that when he was hired and Denny O'Neil, both of them were hired by Stan really wanted them to sound like him because all the Marvel books had sounded like him because he wrote them all. And he wanted anybody who was going to fill in for him to sound like him. And so he drilled them
Mhm.
pretty intensely on, rewriting their scripts, working their scripts, making sure that it sounded like him, which makes it even more amazing that when Roy took over, that Roy said, do whatever you want. You know, Roy at that point, possibly he'd been chafing under what Stan was making him do. I don't know, but um, it's again a unique situation that the editor would say, "I'm not going to edit. Just do
Do
well, do what you want." So
and
yeah, but Stan definitely wanted he wanted those two guys to sound like him when he first hired them. Because I once figured it out. Stan was writing 13 books a month, all the way from the Fantastic Four to Millie the Model, right?
yeah,
13 books a month. I could do 4. 4 was good. In the summer, if I had to fit in a 5th one because there was extra stuff, okay, fine, but that's all I could do, and he was doing 13. So, all credit to Stan for getting it that far and doing what he did with it, but it did change. I mean, it did they moved on from that.
I in that in those years, Stan was present in the bullpen or just it was
It was more difficult for him to be there.
Yeah, he was well, when I first came to work in the Marvel bullpen, he was still there.
uh-huh.
He had an office. Nobody else had an office, right? I mean, it was because the rest of it was just sort of open cubicles and open space and so forth.
Right.
But he had an office because he was Stan. Um, and we overlapped by 6 months, and then after 6 months is when he stopped writing the Fantastic Four and Thor and whatever he was doing at that time, and moved to California to
Now,
this dream of making movies out of all this stuff, which nobody believed in except for him, right? I mean, the idea that there'd be movies when I said, there was this bubble of people who and nobody outside liked comics, so the idea that movies would come of it was that nobody had any faith in that.
yeah,
But so, yeah, no, so, yeah, we overlapped by 6 months in terms of Marvel and
in those years, you with the Jerry Conway and Len
yeah.
Wein, way. You created a strange stuff, and an official Marvel DC crossover published in Amazing Adventures, Justice League of America, and Thor. Was it the sort of a joke, and DC and Marvel editors were informed about it, or it was a joke for them?
It was a joke, and there was this a small town in upper United States called Rutland, in the state of Vermont, and they had a Halloween parade every year. And the year before, several people from the comics world had thought, well, why don't we go up there and see what that's about? And they had a good time, and they came back and said it was fun. So that year, Jerry and Len's wife, Glynis, and I
And wife.
decided we would go. And so we drove up together. I had the car. I was the only one with a car. We drove up together. We drove back together and had a good time while we were up there. And if I may say, you know, I was sort of I was the kind of guy who would say, "Hey, why don't we do this thing?" Right? Len and Jerry were, you know, a little more solid, shall we say, you know, stayed. Um, and so we talked about it and worked this whole thing out about how we would do it. And again, there was nobody overseeing us really at Marvel. At DC, Len did have an editor he had to get this past, Julie Schwartz. But we worked out how this would happen. And if you put the 3 books together, as you may have done, you can see the 4 of us wander into a story and then wander out. But then we wander into the next story. And so it's all, you know, it's the 3 books do go together, although, you know.
Yeah. Two Marvels and one DC.
Right. And so on the Marvel side, we could never say Superman or Batman. And on DC side, he could say Avengers, right? But but it was a Halloween thing. So there was a lot of cosplay going on. And so there were people we could say, oh, that looks like somebody, but we didn't have to say that it was. Just having fun again.
You know, these stories are partially unpublished in Italy. I think that the story in the Justice League, one of the 3. Let's go on. You also worked on Doctor Strange, and in Doctor Strange, you wrote a controversial, we say, storyline about I don't know the right pronunciation, Sisineg.
Sisineg, we said.
Sisineg. It is Genesis spelled backwards.
Exactly.
A wizard who becomes like God, or maybe God himself. And Stanley asked you to retract and say you had to write a God, not God. But you and Branner responded by sending a fake letter from a made-up preacher in Texas, which Marvel published. So we can say you pulled one over on Stan Lee. What was your relationship with him, and how much influence did he still have creatively and editorially, even though Roy Thomas was already editor-in-chief?
Well, Stan was always the top guy. I mean, Roy was running the business, but anything Stan wanted, he could get. He didn't tell us what Roy told me was that Stan had said he was going to ask us to say that it wasn't really God. And by this time, I was pretty used to not having anybody tell me what to do. So I came up with this idea of writing this letter. At the time, we did fool Stan. In later years, he and I talked about it, and he wasn't, it didn't bother him. He was concerned with selling the books, right? And Doctor Strange did well. So that was really enough for him.
And another funny things, I think it's funny there's also the famous story of you, Jim Starlin, and other colleagues spending a wild night with, we say, strange substances. And that night inspired your and Jim Stalin's Shang-Chi. And how much that period, that we say psychedelic period, of your creative process, and what was your relationship with G. Stalin? Are you still in touch today with him?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was the 70s.
Yeah, I know. No?
Right? It was the 70s, and it was New York, and it was, and we were all in our mid-20s, whatever. So I've never made a secret of it. I mean, I enjoyed playing around with stuff that would expand my consciousness. And seeing where I could go with the stories that I was telling. It was always there was a purpose to it. It wasn't just lying around. Yeah, actually, Starlin and I co-created Shang-Chi earlier than that night that you're talking about. But that night, um, Starlin and I and a couple other people, probably Alan Weiss and Alan Milgram, probably, went to some movie and came out about 11 o'clock at night and said, "We're not ready to go home yet. Why don't we walk to the bottom of Manhattan Island?" And so we then partook of some substance and walked south. And in those days, Greenwich Village, where the Bohemians and so forth were, that was kind of the bottom of the civilization of Manhattan. And below that, in those days, it was mostly warehouses. Now it's all been gentrified. It's all been turned into
Yeah.
you know. But in those days, it was long, dark streets. We passed at one point some people who were doing work in a manhole, I think, a hole in the street with a torch thing, which was throwing these huge shadows on the buildings. I mean, it was a very evocative night, very film noir night, um, in and of itself, and also because we were, we'd uh, done stuff, and so that with the character. Actually, the second issue of Shang-Chi we plotted that night. That's how it was.
And let's talk about your wonderful Captain America. Your run on Cap with Sal Buscema is legendary, and Steve Rogers in that stories gives up the costume and becomes a Nobad after the Secret Empire arc. And how much did your personal, political, and cultural experiences shape that run during a hard period for America with Nixon, Watergate, the Vietnam War? And how come Roy Thomas gave you that, that freedom to talk about political themes? Did he agree about these political environment, or what?
Yeah, well, it was the other, in addition to drugs in the 70s, there there was a lot of intellectual ferment. I mean, a lot of people will say that the 70s movies are, like, really good, that 70s music was, like, really good. There were a lot of people who were being creative at that time, and part of that creativity was to conceptualize, um, doing something about the situation of Black people in America, doing something about women, evening things up. So it was a time when it seemed like a lot of progress was being made or going to be made. Um, and so that was the environment that I was working in. And so the idea of doing something political was just a little bit of an extension from that. And that came about because the Watergate thing with Nixon having sent burglars into these opposition parties' headquarters and then denying it and trying to cover it up and all that kind of stuff. That led to congressional hearings. In those days, both sides, both political parties, it's hard to explain today, particularly across the ocean, but everybody considered themselves a statesman. And so even if you were on Nixon's side, you still participated in the hearings to see if you could determine what exactly had gone on. That kind of stuff wouldn't happen today, sad to say. There were high-level congressional hearings into this that was on television all day long. There were 3 networks in America at the time, and actually a 4th one, the public network, and they all carried this live during the day, and then the public network rebroadcast it at night for people who were at work. So everybody in America was really riveted on this. It was something that just sort of took over America. And I was writing Captain America, and it made no sense for me if Captain America was supposed to be living in the real world.
Yes.
You know, he lives in New York. It's like it's supposed to be the real world. How could Captain America not have some reaction to this? And so I set out to write something that would sort of encapsulate what was going on. I couldn't do the actual story. Obviously, it was still going on, for one thing. And for another thing, who knew where it was going to go? But I sort of encapsulated it and then put Captain America into it. And my political and cultural situation, I don't think I was alone in being disillusioned by this, because that's sort of where a lot of people did believe in illusions. I mean, the whole thing that I came up with about Captain America believing in the American ideal and the dream worked because we all believed in the American ideal and the dream. And Nixon had befouled it, and people took care of it, and so that was the right thing to have happen. Everything that Nixon did that was illegal is legal now, I mean, what the politicians learned from that was to say, "I don't remember," rather than answer the questions, right? I mean, it didn't go the way we thought it was gonna go. But at the time, Captain America, I thought, needed to be involved in that, and the idea of being disillusioned and saying, "How the heck can I be a symbol of America when the president has just done this?" made sense to me. But I always knew that, I mean, Captain America would have to come back. How long can I keep this going? How long can I do Captain America without a Captain America? And the answer turned out to be 9 months, I think. But again, the book sold. The book was selling great. People really did like this storyline. And that's all Marvel cared about. If I'd done something outrageous, illegal, whatever, obviously I would have been bounced for that. But so long as I wasn't doing that and I was selling the book, then that was all that Marvel was really interested in. Yeah.
And in fact, with the story of Roscoe Simmons, you brought Steve Rogers back as Captain America. After the Nomad arc, did you face any, I don't know, editorial pressures to do that as soon as possible? Marvel?
No.
No.
No, it was up to me again. And I assured Roy that Captain America would come back at some point. And that was all that.
And my friend Ben, who is a big fan of you, of your stories and your characters, Ben, like Ben Grimm, and he specifically asked me to tell you that he loves you very much. He asks, your run of Captain America changed how the character has been written ever since. Which writer's version did you like the most? The Mattheis, Wade, Brubaker?
And my answer is I liked all of them. I mean, comics is a periodical medium, and I was in charge of Captain America for a number of years. when I left, there was going to be another issue next month, right? Somebody else was going to take it over. And so there are the different eras. People have, have had their shot at Captain America. And I'm just pleased that this idea I had when I was still just barely in the business turned out to be the default character on this guy. I'm a fan of everybody's. I mean, um, they were in different eras. They had different editorial constraints. They had, different things they had to deal with. But
Yes.
but they all did it, and that's good.
And so in March 76, you left Marvel.
Mm.
Was it because of a conflict with the poor Jim Shooter or other editors? Can you tell us what happened behind the scenes?
Well,
Why?
um, I I'm reluctant now to get into names, but there was when Roy decided he didn't want to do it anymore. They went through a series of editors. Marv Wolfman was an editor. Len Wein was an editor. Jerry Conway was an editor, right? And at some point, um, I really don't want to. I really don't want to name names, but I mean, at some point, one of those editors. Well, that sort of lays it. In any event, I became dissatisfied.
Okay.
The editor in question decided he was going to take Avengers away from me and Defenders away from Steve Gerber because he wanted to write them himself. And I didn't feel that that's how a bullpen full of happy people was supposed to operate. I still believed in the illusion of, I mean, it wasn't an illusion, but I believed in the ideals, the Marvel ideals, to go along with my American ideals. And so I said, I'm out of here. I'm not going to let you take this book away from me. I mean, if you take it, I'm out of here. And my wife had traveled in Europe for a year before we knew each other, and I thought, I want to go to Europe.
Yeah, in fact, my next question is that Janet Kahn brought you in DC, and in that period, I have read that you were thinking about moving to Europe. So is that
Well, not
true?
yeah, not moving, but I wanted to travel, and what we eventually did, we bought a Volkswagen van at the factory in Germany, and drove it to England, and then we spent a month in Scotland, a month in England, a month in Germany, a month in France, a month in Scandinavia, and then it got to be winter, so we went to Mallorca and spent the winter. Didn't make it to Italy on that trip, unfortunately. Um, but so we were over there for 9 months, and I love to travel. I mean, I love to travel. I told you before we started that I have now been to Italy several times. Happy to come back again if you have a convention that would like to invite me. Uh, but I like seeing the world. I like s I speak Spanish pretty well. I speak French reasonably well. I speak some German. Il mio italiano è molto limitato.
It's okay.
But I mean, so, uh, I like talking to people. I like seeing different things. Anyway, that being said, that's what I plan to do. After I left Marvel, we started working out, we were gonna sell our house, which we did, et cetera, in order to finance this trip. Um, and then Jeanette Kahn called up and said, "I'd really like you to come over and, in her words, do for the Justice League what you did for the Avengers. Give them characters, give them stories," because the Justice League was basically a bunch of icons. And I said, "Well, I can only do it for a little while because I'm going to go to Europe." And she said, "That's fine." And so I said, "Okay, I'll do the Justice League, but I want to do Batman too." Because I loved the Batman, and I thought that was going to be my only shot to do the Batman. So, and she said yes. And so I did, like maybe 9 month Detective Comics from the Batman comics. They were publishing 7 books a year. It was bi-monthly, but there was an extra one in the summer. And then later, when the first one sold really well, they added an 8th book for that year. That's why that run of Batman that I did, 8-ish. But I always knew that it was going to be limited, right? I mean, so it was kind of good in that I could conceive of a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I wasn't writing as I did with all the Marvel books where I was just writing. So I did the DC stuff, and then went to Europe, and I didn't know who was going to draw the Batman, because at that time, pretty much all the DC stars, Neil Adams, Gil Kane, they had all gone to Marvel because Marvel was having more fun, and they were, and there wasn't really anybody left who was like the guy to do Batman. So I wrote those scripts, full script in advance, and I put as much as I could into them because A, I really wanted to do a good Batman because I love the Batman, and B, I wanted to make it as difficult to screw up as possible because who knew who was going to draw it? And then when we were in Mallorca that winter, I got the package from Julie Schwartz, the editor at DC, with all of the books in it, and that's the first time that I saw Marshall Rogers and Terry Austin. Right? And honestly, I'm not a part of any organized religion, but I honestly said, "Thank you, God," when I saw how nice that artwork was, right? Because it was everything that I could have wished for, but never expected to get. And so I didn't meet Marshall and Terry until I came back from Europe and came back to New York and met those guys for the first time. So, and I came back to find out just how popular that whole thing had been, which again, in a small village in Mallorca, I wasn't and with no internet, right? I had no idea that it had.
So in your Batman was more mature, more human, and fighting his inner demons, and it's called the definitive Batman. Your Batman arc. So, do you think that Neil Adams and Daniel O'Neill have in some way influenced your Batman, influenced your way to write Batman?
Well, Neil certainly. Danny and I had different approaches to it, so I don't think that I got much from Danny. But I mean, I read all those stories, so part of that was entering my consciousness. Neil's approach, I mean, I really thought his art was fantastic, and he had done the Batman. That had helped shape my vision of what the Batman should look like. But it was mostly, I don't know if you've seen the Superman movie yet. I don't know if it's released over there. But James Gunn said that one of the things he wanted to do in the Superman movie was kind of recapture what it was like when he was a child and he first encountered Superman. I didn't go back. I didn't want to recapture my childhood. But in a sense, I was reading comics in the 50s and American comics in the 50s. There are no memorable stories. I love the Batman, even though the Batman was reasonably bland in that time period.
Your Batman has vibes from the original Batman from the Golden Age, the first stories.
Right, that was the thing. It's like when they gave me Captain America and they said, "This isn't doing well, come up with an idea if you can." And I went back and I kind of thought, okay, that's what this needs. It needs the American ideals for him. With Batman, even with Denny and Neil and other people, he had become sort of, he was a superhero, right? But he didn't really, and it was at night and there were things, but you never really got that atmosphere, I didn't think. Every once in a while, DC had republished some of the early stories and the art was crude, but the atmosphere was intense. It was very definitely dead of night, vampires and monsters and things, and the Joker, who was a homicidal maniac in those days. And I thought, that's been lost. I need to bring that back. The pulp film noir atmosphere that I need to bring back. But then the other thing that I wanted to do, I always, even when I was a kid, when Lois Lane would snuggle up to Superman, he would get embarrassed. He would back off from girls. And I thought, well, that's not how people, that even as a kid, I thought that's not what adult people do. And I really felt that Batman again had sort of plateaued, and what I wanted to do was make him an adult, make him a grown-up person, right? And what do grown-up people do? They have relationships with grown-up women. And so that's where Silver St. Cloud came in, and that whole thing about. So on the one hand, I wanted to bring back the atmosphere, but I wanted to move him forward, which is what that's what I tried to do with everybody. It's like, can I move this someplace? And so that worked, I mean, that people did buy those books. And the first Batman movie, the Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, Tim Burton movie that was based on the Doris. And so I take some credit for having sort of opened up the idea that
But you were you credited in the
No.
no.
no, I said earlier that Marvel was a bunch of people who really liked doing comics. DC was, and maybe now under Jim Lee, it's changing, but mostly DC's history is that they are a corporation who hires people to turn out product for them. That's how they looked at it. And they never, it wasn't fun at DC. It was a business. And they were very clear that they owned everything. It was all work for hire, which it was. We understood that. But with Marvel, you got appreciation. With DC, you didn't get appreciation. And 10 years went by between the time that the stories came out, and Jeanette Kahn called me up from DC and said they've had several different Hollywood screenwriters write this, and they can't get that atmosphere. They don't get it. So we need you to come in and work on these scripts. And I did that. As it turns out, that was a scam too. I should have been hired by the production company rather than Jeanette Kahn. But they made sure not to pay me a lot of money that way. But every script that I worked on, Silver St. Cloud was in it, Boss Thorn was in it. Then when they were ready to start shooting it and all that, and I wasn't working on scripts anymore, a year went by, and then I went to see the movie, and to my great surprise, it was Vicky Vale and Boss Grissom, right? No credit, changed my characters, and I said to them, why did you not go with Silver St. Cloud? And they said, well, because we'd have to pay you money. I mean, that encapsulates what DC was. I hope that they're changing. But that throughout my relationship with them, that's been the relationship. I have said on occasion that I really liked doing Batman, but on one level, I'm sorry that I did it because they made a lot of money off of it and made sure not to give me any of it. So,
And about movies, I have got another question. You created many characters, and also
Right.
created the Star-Lord. You create Mantis. You create the Shang-Chi.
Guy Gardner,
What?
in the Superman movie.
Yeah, yes. And was it like seeing your characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or in the new DC universe? Is it a source of pride, or is there some bitterness since your credit is often just a name in the titles, when there is that name,
Yeah.
and nothing else?
I'm pretty good with it. I mean, I did make it clear that I wasn't happy about what happened to Mantis. I spent a lot of time creating that character from scratch, and that's not the character in the movie. However, I like the character in the
Star-Lord 2 is totally different, but in the comics 2 is totally different from your Star-Lord
Yeah, but I didn't, I made Star-Lord unlikable. And my idea was on the series I was gonna do was he would learn to be a better person over time. But I only did the first issue where he was unlikable, and then I left in that same leaving that we were talking about. Um, and so other people had to figure out what to do with him. And so on the one hand, I created him. On the other hand, most of his time was spent with other people. So I don't have a problem with Star-Lord. With Mantis, I did, and I said so. But I did like the Mantis in the movie, and I liked the movies. I thought the Guardian of the Galaxy movies were good. So, in I recognize that movies and comics are different. With comics, you're basically sort of hitting a climax
Yes.
at every page, you know? I mean, it's like it's fast moving, it's compact. Movies have to kinda spread out over 2 hours, and the beats are different. So I can't say, "Oh, well," you know, it's like, as they say, apples and oranges, right? I mean, they're 2 different things, and
Do they invite you to the premiere or something like that?
Ye
Cioè, do they consider you or not when there is a new movie with your characters? I'm talking about Marvel Studios, but DC Studios too now.
neither one of them consults us. But Marvel, and I guess DC now, they don't come to us and say, "Well, we're gonna use something that you did in the movie. Do you have any ideas?" That doesn't happen. But if they do that, if they do use something, then you do get credit, and if it's a character created, you do get royalties, you know? Um, so, um, I mean, my name appears on pretty much half of Marvel's entire output one way or another, I mean, which is kinda cool. But I've never been involved in doing any of that stuff, which is a little frustrating. I mean, sometimes I'd like to, but that's not how that works. I understand that, and I can roll with that.
G Stalin made a cameo in a movie, Jim
Making a
Starlin.
cameo?
Yes, in Avengers Endgame, he made a cameo.
Starling did, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
No, I haven't been asked to do that, no.
Uh, okay, let's go on with your career after DC. You came back to Marvel for a short period, and you with the West Coast Avengers, the Vision, and the Scarlet Witch series, and you created, for example, the character of Billy Maximoff. Today, Billy is better known as Wiccan,
Right.
prominent young gay superhero. How do you feel when a minor character you created is rediscovered, completely reinvented? Do you like this situation
Sure,
or
sure. Well, I mean, if I had had to make a list of all the characters that I created, the that were going to be in a movie, Star-Lord would have been at the bottom of that list.
yeah,
I would never have expected Star-Lord to show up in movies, right? So that's when I learned that, again, the people who are making the movies can sort of pull from everything that's available to them, and they might like some character that I didn't give that much consideration to. I mean, um, Billy and Tommy Maximoff, they were babies, right? I mean, at the end of the Vision Witch series, they were born, and that's as far as I took them. But it's kind of the same deal as with Star-Lord. I mean, other people took them other places, but I still get royalties for them because, I created them. Um, and it is interesting, a lot has happened with those 2 boys, and they're gonna from what I hear, they're going to be significant in the Marvel Universe.
and in the late 80s, you start writing Fantastic Four, and it was a mess, a mess. What happens? Maybe that problem. I have an idea, but I'm not sure about that, of course.
Well,
Maybe the new owners, the new of Marvel had a role in this bad situation that has been created between you and the stories, how you wish to develop, and how they wanted you to develop the stories.
Right. That's exactly it. When I came back, Jim Shooter was the editor at that point, but he basically gave me free rein because that's what I'd had and that had worked, and he was smart enough to figure why should he get involved in that. But it actually sort of started with the Silver Surfer in that when I started the Silver Surfer series, every Silver Surfer story to that point ended with him flying away alone, feeling sad. And I thought, well, that's cool in the mid-60s, but now we're in the 80s and we've been doing it for 20 years. So I really wanted to get him off of Earth, and I wanted to like open him up and not have him be suffering all the time. So I did that, and then I took on the FF and so forth. But then the new owners
Mm.
came to me in the form of an editor and said, well, we're really interested mostly in merchandising now. Now everybody knows who Spider-Man is, right? We don't have to like develop Spider-Man anymore. One thing they said was we don't have to pay people big bucks to write Spider-Man. I wasn't doing Spider-Man, but that was the example they used. They said anybody can write Spider-Man now because he's popular and it'll just, it'll be fine, which showed how much they understood about what business they were in. But anyway, they said, we want you to go back with the Surfer to go back to writing one-issue stories in which he pines for Shia LaBeouf. And I said, but that's what we got rid of, and that's what everybody was tired of. Well, no, but it'll be simpler that way, Won't have these big complex stories. We'll just have one-issue stories. And as far as the Fantastic Four goes, you had written out Reed and Sue, and you've, replaced them with Ms. Marvel and Crystal, right? Which I had done because once again, I wanted to get back. I thought they'd become stale. It was the same four people. Sorry, I'm getting to your point, but with the FF, it was like Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny all the time, right? Which is they're a family, they blah blah blah. But it was 300 issues by that time, and I wanted to get back with them to their early vibe of like we're sort of making it up as we go. We're not professional superheroes. We don't really know. So I thought putting Ben in charge, that was all the thinking. But they came and they said, well, we want Reed and Sue to come back because we're trying to sell lunch boxes, was their example. We can't sell the Fantastic Four if the Fantastic Four that we're selling is not in the comic. Therefore, you have to put them back in the comic. And that, again, offended my Marvel ideals, right? So I said, well, I really don't want to do that. And they said, well, then we really don't want you to write these series, but we will give you 6 months to kind of wrap everything up. And then you're gone. So in those 6 months, I stopped putting my name on stuff on the Fantastic Four. First, I used John Harkness, which was just a pseudonym that I had used here and there. And then as things got worse, then I even took that off and went for SFX Englehart. SFX is an abbreviation for sound effects, right? But on the FF, I had all these ideas, all these things I was going to develop.
Yes, they were not the best years for Marvel Comics.
No, well, I mean, they were the guys who thought, let's put out everything as a #1 in a plastic bag, and everybody bought those in crazy for like 3 months, and then after that, they went bankrupt, right? They had no idea how to actually run a publishing company. They just wanted to suck as much money out of it as they could. So
Anyway, I think that mm, the problem back then and now too is that, in my opinion, comics today are not the core business
No.
for so they have just become an inspiration, a recipient for movies, for TV series, for animated series, and so on. But comic is not the core business, and they don't want to bet on it today. And I think it's an irreversible process, unfortunately. I
Yeah.
the,
Yeah,
the-
no, I think that's right. I mean, again, when I started, 1.5 million people knew comics and everybody else did not want to know. Now, everybody does know who Spider-Man is. Everybody does know who the Avengers are because of the movies, right?
yeah,
And so the movies are where the money is, and comics are basically I sort of a legacy business in a sense. I mean, I don't think that there's anybody I'm not involved in them today, so I'm about to make a blanket statement, and I'm already backing off of it. Um, but I think most people doing comics today, they want to do them, but they know that it's not capturing the public's
yes.
imagination. I mean, there are certainly people trying to do good stuff, but I think there are a lot of people who are just, it's like it doesn't matter if it's good or not. I mean, Marvel used to cancel books that didn't sell 350,000 copies. I mean, most Marvel books sold 750,000 to 1,000,000 copies of every book every month. If it got down to like close to 350, that's when you got canceled. Now, if you sell 30,000,
Mm.
it's a big deal. Everybody's really happy, you know? Um, so, I'm not on the inside of that business, so I can't say how it all looks, but, yeah, it's, comic it's just legacy now. It's just, we have to have Batman product because we're trying to sell Batman movies, and that's true for Marvel as well.
And I also think that authors, the new authors today, I think that um, their better ideas are saved for created owner stories. And
Yeah.
when they write for Marvel or for DC, they don't give the best ideas they have. I have this aspect. I'm not sure, of course, but I think that they use Marvel and DCs to promote their themselves.
Themselves, yeah.
And it's right. It's right. It's okay. I'm not cri- criticizing it,
Yeah.
but they use the majors to promote themselves, but they prefer, of course, because they gain more money with the creator-owned stories. I think that this is another reason to the about the stories that we have today that are not so wonderful like yesterday. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It is true as people generally get older, they go, "Well, back when I was a kid, things were better." But I think it's objectively true with comics. I do think the '70s was, a high point for all of that stuff. Um, I mean, again, it's amazing to me 50 years later that anybody knows this stuff. I mean, we did all that stuff for the moment. I mean, we were entertaining people that month in that specific area. The idea that it would live on never occurred to anybody. It is true, uh, because comics is work for hire. You got into Marvel and you wanted to create things, and then after a while you go, "Wait a minute, I'm creating things, but I don't own them. So I'm not gonna create anything." Right? Fortunately, I created enough people before I figured that out that now they're making movies with them and I'm getting royalties for them. But, um it's difficult to, if you're aware of the business aspect, which I think everybody is now, which we weren't so much then. I totally get it. And I also think when I went into comics, I never thought there was anything beyond comics. So, I did what I did to make the best comics I could. People coming in today know that there's stuff beyond comics. And so the idea that like, I'm going to make the greatest comic ever is like, it doesn't really compute. It's like, because, even if you did, even if you were young and you really wanted to do the best Captain America or whatever you could possibly do, that like only 30,000 people are going to read it. And, your royalties will be minor because that's been the spirit and all that. Now it's the movies. That's what, if you want to do the best Captain America ever, you're trying to get to write a Captain America movie,
Yes.
that's right. So
I got another question. The question is, when you wrote Captain America, Secret Empire, there was the Vietnam War, there was the Watergate scandals, and so on, Richard Nixon, so on. People fight to make things better. Okay,
right, yeah,
people was angry, okay, against Nixon, against. Today, not only you, but we have Trump in the USA, and my perception is that people doesn't fight anymore. Why people now seems to dream when Trump and his way to make politic is so best, is so worse.
different eras.
And sorry, and these things I see these things in the comics too, because um, now Marvel and DC Comics today seems to lack the courage to have a position.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, they had a position, Marvel had a position because us writers had a position, and we were young and we were part of that time. I think I sort of described the world of the 70s earlier in terms of the politics of things. I would say that there are a lot of people on the opposition side who really want to fight, but I think some of the leaders on the opposition side sort of figure it's just politics. We'll go along, and then at some point we'll get our time, and then, so on and so forth. I know that public opinion polls show that a lot of Trump's policies are like very unpopular. The problem is that Trump is doing everything he can to be a dictator, and he doesn't care. Doesn't matter to him what people think. He's just going to do it anyway. I will just say, from my perspective, Trump will never stop. Trump must be stopped if it's gonna happen, because he will always go forward. But it's not just him. He's got a whole bunch of right-wing ideologues behind him who are much better at the policy aspect of things. So hopefully the fact that these policies that are being implemented are unpopular will lead to a change in the future. On the other hand, if Trump manages to completely become a dictator, then there may not be election again. You don't know. So it's an interesting time for somebody who believed in American ideals and figured once we took care of Nixon and Watergate, then we're good, but I'm still here, and and I'm seeing that. The other thing though that I think about, it's like most people can go about their daily lives not being affected by who's running the government. People still fall in love, and they go to movies, and they go to the grocery store, and they watch TV, and they do, whatever. It's not like, there are Nazis in the streets, which is a good thing to make you want to feel like you want to fight back or something like that. It's like, it's subtler. I certainly hope that America will recover itself, but it's a possibility that, that it won't.
I am afraid. I am afraid because I see, well, of course, I see the situation from Italy, of course, but my perception is that there is a very uh, new situation in your country that
Yeah.
never happened before. I hope that everything will be right in the future, but as you told before, I think that um, a man like Trump must be stopped because he never stops.
Right. And
Never
so far, we don't have anybody who's willing to sort of step
stopped
and
with
stop. Yeah.
must be stopped with the democracy. Of course, I'm not talking about bad things,
Sure.
but it's hard. It's hard because it will be a very hard test for democracy, for American democracy.
Sure.
Okay. Let's change. Let's talk about beautiful things. What's your projects for the future?
Um, well, there's after Marshall Rogers, Terry Austin, and I did the second run of Batman, I wrote a third one, and then Marshall died after penciling the first issue of the next 6 issues. And DC, in its infinite wisdom, decided not to publish that stuff. A number of people stepped up and said, "We'd be happy to do the art to finish it off for Marshall as an homage to Marshall."
Mhm.
And DC was like, "No." But Jim Lee now is yes. So apparently we are going to publish the third run of Batman. We don't have an
Oh.
artist for it yet. Uh, because this just happened last week. I mean, it was just last week that Jim said, "Hey, I want to do this." So I have hopes for DC's future under a more enlightened leadership. Um, and James Gunn also more enlightened. The guy who's doing the movies, in charge of the movies for DC. Um, James Gunn doesn't materially affect me directly, but I'm just saying there seems to be a change in attitude at DC. And I have another series that I wrote during the pandemic because it was big and complex, and
Huh?
and of course everybody during the pandemic had time to do big projects if that's what they wanted to do. Um, it got so big. It was 7 60-page graphic albums to tell this entire story.
Wow.
It had a lot of characters, it had a lot of plot, it had a lot of stuff, and it was a writer's challenge. It was me saying, "Can I do this? Can I make a story that big and hold it all together and all these things happening?" When I got done with it and realized that it was now gonna be 7 60-page books, I said, "Well, there's nobody gonna draw this, right?" It's like, who's gonna draw 420 pages of a thing? But Jim Lee's interested in that now too. I mean, there's no guarantee on that one, but they're looking at that one now,
Ah,
which
uh-huh.
at least
Yes.
is some progress. So, uh, you know, the thing about writing, at least for me, is, when you get to be retirement age and they don't give you a gold watch and then you go off and you're done, writing is just something that I do. So I like to write, and the last 15 years, whatever, I haven't really worried, thank thankfully to the movies who send me checks every once in a while.
Uh-huh.
I haven't had to worry about I have to sell stuff. So I've been writing stuff that just is like, this is an interesting story. I don't know if it'll ever be published, but it's interesting to me to write it. And so I have a number of those things. And now apparently maybe people will be interested. So there might be stuff, and if not, I'm good either way because I did have the fun of writing them, but I am excited about, Dark Detective 3 because that's been around since 2006, and You know, it's too bad Marshall's not still here.
It's
Do it.
great
Uh,
news, and we can't wait to read it. This
Yeah.
track.
Well, I mean, we're just in the process, as I say, of finding an artist, and I don't really know the time schedule, but I wouldn't think it would be. I would assume it would come out next year. You know,
Next year.
that's what I would think. Yeah. I mean, that would be my guess. I'm not. I haven't dealt with DC in a long time because I didn't like DC, and you know, and they'd screwed me a couple of times, and it was like, yeah. But basically, when Joe Staten and I heard that Guy Gardner was going to be in the Superman movie, um, we thought it was time to get back in touch with them. And fortunately, it is Jim Lee in charge now. He's a reasonable guy who's is an artist himself. So I hope DC is going to be a more viable place to go. And meanwhile, you know, I'm still friends with Marvel. Most of my stuff is Marvel. You know, we'll see. But I'm still here and I'm still writing stuff. So we'll see what happens.
And then we want to watch you in a cameo in the next MCU movie.
That's good for me. I'm good with that.
Okay, Steve, I thank you very, 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 very much for this interview. This is my first interview. I appreciate very, very much. Ok, intervista si conclude qui. Grazie a tutti per averci seguito. Ci vediamo alla prossima. Ciao.